You're watching Dontaesboxingnation.
Dontaesboxingnation, what's going on, guys? You know, one of the main things I love about the sport of boxing is it is truly the theater of the unexpected. And that is pretty much what we've seen tonight. Going into this fight, I think a lot of people assumed that if this fight went the distance, then Bernard Hopkins had a very good chance of pulling off the upset. If this fight were to end in a knockout, it would most likely be a victory by Sergey Kovalev. But if somebody would have told me that Sergey Kovalev was going to go in there, outbox, outthink, and even out-hustle Bernard Hopkins in the inside, even when they were clinching, I would have said, get the hell out of here. I would have said, I'll believe it when I see it. Well, let's just say I believe it now, because that is exactly what I saw. You know, not in all fights, but in a lot of fights, you can pretty much tell how the fight is going to play out by watching the first 2 or 3 rounds. I think this was that type of fight. The first thing I noticed in like the first 2 rounds was Kovalev was putting an enormous amount of pressure on Bernard Hopkins. Usually B-Hop is controlling the ring. He's using great ring generalship to where even though he's moving around the ring, he's pretty much doing whatever he wants to do. But in this fight, it looked like Sergey Kovalev was controlling the ring with effective aggression and pressure. And you know a person is controlling the ring when the opponent, his back is constantly up against the ropes. And he was just basically jumping from one side of the ropes to the other side of the ropes. He was having a very difficult time trying to keep the fight in the center of the ring, which is where a boxer wants to keep the fight. So Kovalev, he kept backing Bernard Hopkins up against the ropes. And what Sergey Kovalev would do, which was very smart, is he would jump on Bernard Hopkins, and then as soon as he gets off a combination, he would take a huge step back. So as soon as Bernard Hopkins was ready to counter, Kovalev was nowhere to be found. And then Bernard Hopkins, he would be forced to reset. He was very rangy in there, and he did pretty much the opposite of what we all, at least the majority of us, including Bernard Hopkins, expected him to do. Bernard Hopkins, he said leading up to the fight, he only fights one way. And he ain't going to be able to change that, you know, in 6 months or whatever, 3 months, whatever the training camp was. But he did change it. He adjusted. Kovalev fought the perfect fight. I've always said that Bernard Hopkins, he has problems with boxers. And this is exactly how Kovalev fought Bernard Hopkins, like a boxer. I mean, in a certain sense, Kovalev didn't even really take a whole lot of chances. I mean, everything was a counter for a counter. It kind of reminded me of the Nicholas Walters versus Nonito Donaire fight. You have an aggressive fighter who's, you know, putting a lot of pressure on the boxer, but guess what? The aggressive fighter is actually the counterpuncher. I mean, he'll get close, he'll throw a little punch, but then he'll try to jump out, and then he'll try to counter Bernard Hopkins' counter. That's how he knocked down Bernard Hopkins. He's chasing him around, he throws a punch, Bernard Hopkins tries to counter with his head down, and Kovalev takes a step back and catches him with a quick check hook. Kovalev's counterpunching ability was completely on point. I mean, almost every time Bernard Hopkins even landed a counter, Kovalev would land a punch at the exact same time. So he wasn't in there fighting like a dumb fighter. This was a very impressive performance by Kovalev. I didn't know that he could box that well. I thought he would go in there front foot heavy and leaving himself open for all type of counter shots, but he didn't fight that way. He fought the complete opposite. And once again, these are the type of opponents that give Bernard Hopkins problems, are thinkers, boxers, okay? Jermaine Taylor, Calzaghe, Roy Jones, of course, in the first fight. These are the type of fighters that give Bernard Hopkins problems. Chad Dawson boxers. And Kovalev, he pulled an audible. He completely switched things up, and he was successful at doing it. Kovalev did an excellent job of not falling for the bait. He wasn't going to fall for the bait. Like I said, he would jump in, he would jump right out. And Bernard Hopkins could never reach him. Because Kovalev fought such a disciplined fight, he was forcing Bernard Hopkins to sell out. And as the fight progressed, you've seen Bernard Hopkins try to be a little bit more aggressive, but the more aggressive he got, the more aggressive Kovalev got, and the more accurate he was with his punches. You know, that right hand on the top of the head, it just kept landing over and over because Bernard Hopkins, you know, he's used to leaning down, getting low, and Kovalev was surprisingly able to take advantage of that. So once again, man, this was a very, very impressive performance. Intelligent pressure, intelligent aggression, basically translated to a perfect performance. Who would have thought Kovalev would go in there and sweep Bernard Hopkins 12 rounds to 0? That is pretty impressive, guys. That is pretty impressive. To have that kind of power and be able to box that well, that's pretty impressive. Now, of course, we have to commend the alien Bernard Hopkins. We all knew going into this fight, regardless if he won or lost, he was already considered a legend in the sport of boxing. He's already done things that no other fighter has done at that age, and I really don't think he has anything else to prove. However, I will say for the people who are already getting ready to make excuses for Bernard Hopkins and say he got old tonight, Bernard Hopkins didn't get old. He just got outboxed, and he got outsmarted the entire night. Like I said, Hopkins couldn't even do his little dirty tricks on the inside. Kovalev was beating him at that. So this was an A-plus performance by Sergey Kovalev. I mean, nobody expected him to put on such a dominant performance over Bernard Hopkins, but he did. So that's pretty much all I got. I'm on to the next one.